Say when.
Also, we did our presentation on the 26th and 27th Presidents of the United States, Theodore, Roosevelt, and William H. Taft.
So, Theodore Roosevelt had this, had a theory.
You need to speak louder.
Theodore Roosevelt had a theory. He had this idea. Well, actually, this is like a quote of what he thought the stewardship theory really encompassed. That he was a steward of the people. That it's kind of similar to like Andrew Jackson, how he would want to be like a man of the people. So he used this stewardship theory as it's like his own interpretation of the executive power, and so he used this as like a justification for many of his policies that could be seen as he over-exercised his power, but I mean it's debatable. And he was inspired by Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson. Like he read their works and everything. He was like a really big fanboy, and using this theory, he diverged the presidential power from the Constitution. He interpreted the Constitution loosely, and he kind of believed that he could do whatever, and the Constitution was only a limit, as long whatever he did, as long as it was for the people and it was for the benefit of the people. And so these are more quotes that kind of describe what his theory was like. And in this one, he's sitting, and you can't see, but on the crown it says unwritten Constitution, and the format is U.S. Constitution. That's his club, that kind of the big stick. And then in that one, it's kind of similar. He's really big with the stick, and then it says the Constitution. So, he was a progressive president, so he enacted a lot of social reform, and he believed that leaders of big businesses were evil men, and they didn't really understand what the public interest was. So, in order to make, first the answer say.
There was actually a strike before this. There was a successful strike before 1902 that inspired this strike because they were sort of successful. They sort of got some of the workers sort of got some things that they wanted, more pay, but they didn't get recognition of the union. So again, they struck again in 1902, and it's the same. They asked for more pay, shorter hours. They asked for a 20% increase in pay and a reduction from the 10-hour workday to the 8-hour workday. But after the previous strike, coal companies complained that their profits were low because they had to increase wages and stuff, and that the workers became undisciplined because they had the organization of the union. So the workers struck again, but this was the first time that the federal government had intervened in one of these worker strikes in favor of the labor. Well, if not in favor of the labor unions, at least not fully in favor of the employers. All before that, presidents will either not intervene or would intervene for the employer. So Roosevelt mediated between labor and capital. This was the first time that they had that was in place. The workers did gain some of the things that they asked for, although it wasn't completely fully what they had asked for. They only got 10% increase, and they only got a 9-hour workday. And the mine owners still refused to recognize the labor unions as an actual organization, but they did get some pseudo credence in their eyes, and really significantly, a 6-man arbitration board, of the 3 of the employers and 3 of the employees were mates to work out any disputes that couldn't be worked out otherwise. So that was actual negotiation.
So the square deal was another policy, was a domestic policy of Roosevelt, and it resulted from the anthracite coal strike. like when they had to mediate, he kind of well, before they were like none of them would really budge, and then he came in. He was like, well, this is a square deal. Says that he would treat everyone equally, and like when I say square deal, I mean square deal to everyone, and it's not just for the common, like the kind of worker and labor. Like sometimes it may seem that Theodore Roosevelt was very like he favored labor, but he didn't really. He strove to help. He believed that like he had to balance both labor interests and business interests. So he thought that the government should act as something to regulate or to provide economic and social justice. So before, I think Everett mentioned yesterday there was a Knight case where the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was meant to like kind of get rid of trust, but it didn't really work because other kind of like argued that it didn't apply to manufacturing. Well, Roosevelt kind of overturned that decision with the Northern Securities case, and it kind of gave the U.S. government like more power over to like regulate trusts and like bust trusts, and then an important thing was that he recognized the distinction between good trusts and bad trusts. You can see in this political cartoon that he's kind of, the bear is like the bad trust, and then the good trust here is like kind of on a leash. So to differentiate, the good trusts were those that serve the community and stimulate production. They kind of respect the rights of others, and most importantly, they obeyed the law. So it didn't matter whether they were like really successful or not, as long as they obeyed the law and kind of served the people. Theodore saw it as a good trust. And bad trusts were those that like profited by using like plotting and like techniques like trying to buy out businesses, and that restricted competition and oppressed their laborers and workers and overpriced goods. And so Theodore Roosevelt, he created a Department of Commerce and Labor to distinguish between the good and bad trusts. They kind of researched and like on corporate activities, it kind of made like recommendations to Congress for regulations, or like advised like who to like bust and who not to. And so bad trusts would be kind of like a preventive measure. They would try to get them before they became too powerful and break them up. And good trusts would have the security and government protection as long as they were lawful. So again, that goes back to it didn't matter whether they like, I think Steele, one of the Carnegie Steele, he considered it as a good trust, even though it kind of monopolized like a lot of things. So railroad regulation, kind of the same idea that he passed, like Theodore, like Roosevelt repeatedly like tried to give the government more power to regulate monopolies and trusts. So these are like the railroad versions. So the Elkins Act, it ended railroad shipping rebates, which was like the railroad companies could charge less if you shipped more goods, so that kind of favored big businesses. And Hepburn Act of 1906 gave the Interstate Commerce Commission power to regulate the rates. And labor reform. So in his annual message of 1905, which I think is his second term, he like strove to, he wanted to make laws for labor reform and consumer protection, like all these various progressive reform things. And he supported legislation for stronger controls over the entire industrial economy, and to like same idea, He wanted government more power over to regulate the economy, and yeah. And although it was like thwarted by it, Congress kind of like opposed it, but Roosevelt was like a really like aggressive guy, and he kind of sought ways around it, and he found ways. And he also attacked the judicial branch for their outdated philosophy. And if you read his biography, you can hear him bash on senators and justices. And so consumer protection, like Pure Food and Drug Act, meat inspection laws, government supervision, just further progressive reforms. And here's Taft. So Roosevelt was probably most remembered for his conservation efforts. So the Antiquities Law of 1906, it gave the government power to set aside land for like parks and historic landmarks, mainly to stop destruction, because a lot of people were worried that the frontier that had closed, like the wilderness, would disappear, as that was part of the American identity. And so he worked to expand the national park system. He created a lot of parks, national monuments, wild refuges. He expanded the national forest reserves, and he imposed fees on the use of public lands. But mainly he didn't want to like close off the wilderness and kind of like lock it away. He wanted to use it in like a conscientious way to develop it properly.
Taft is not that long in comparison. So, Roosevelt promised he wouldn't run for a third term, but he won in 1904 for his second term. So he needed someone to, go in his place to carry out his policies, or his my policies. He chose Taft as Secretary of War, but Taft was a guy who really didn't like politics. He was more of a judicial guy. He wanted to be the Supreme Court justice that. So it was more like Roosevelt kind of running his campaign for him, and Taft was sort of like his puppet. They said that Taft stood for take advice from Theodore. These pictures are so good. There's another one. Taft is like the sheep. Theodore. And also in stickers. Taft's campaign promise was to lower tariffs, so that was like the first thing he tried to get to do in 1909. He called a special session for Congress, and they got together. They tried to lower the tariffs, but this one guy, Aldrich, he really wanted to increase the tariffs on like hundreds of things, and so they worked out a compromise. 650 tariffs were lowered, 220 were raised, and 1,015 were kept the same, but and Taft thought this was like a great compromise between the two. Like there were two factions of the Republican Party, one that was more conservative and one that was progressive. But obviously, like the progressives thought that he was going back on his campaign promise, and that started to rift the two factions in the Republican Party. He continued to mess up. Taft wanted really to continue what Theodore was doing. So, the corporate income tax in 1909, that's like on the picture in the last slide, there was this bandage on the foot of the Taft bill called the income tax. And that was, this taxed corporations, which was sort of like a good thing for like controlling the power of businesses. So, this was a precursor to what we have now, the income tax, the 16th Amendment, that taxes not on corporations but on active people. For railroad regulation, the Mann-Elkins Act just gave more power to the Interstate Commerce Commission. Like how it was already established that the long hauls and short hauls, long hauls could not be cheaper than short hauls, but there wasn't a lot of teeth to the act back then. It was just reinforced power. Taft actually busted more trusts than Roosevelt. He busted 90 and Roosevelt busted only 44, and Roosevelt had 2 terms. So, but Taft kind of messed up, so that's why we don't really remember him as a great trust buster. As Michelle said, how Roosevelt liked U.S. Steel, he thought it was good trust, but Taft was the kind of guy who liked to follow the law. He was a very judicial kind of guy, so he didn't really make the distinction between good and bad. He just attacked all trust. When he attacked U.S. Steel, he made Roosevelt really angry because Roosevelt was part of like the merger in the trust. So also big businesses felt betrayed because Taft had seemed like sort of a conservative president. Now all of a sudden he was attacking businesses, and eventually all this criticism got to him when he was withdrew from all his trust busting, and he also then lost the backing of progressive Republicans who used to support Roosevelt. And I have a picture of him golfing because he started to surround himself with conservative businessmen who also like to golf. Taft also did a lot for conservation, but again, he's not really remembered by that because there was this controversy. The founder, the Secretary of the Interior was accused of opening land and selling lands to big business interests, and by this guy was not mentioned in the textbook, but he also got fired. He was acquitted of these charges of corruption, but then he got into a dispute with the head of the Forest Service, and Roosevelt backed his friend. Taft protected Taft fired founder resigned. Taft fired this guy for insubordination, and that got people mad again, especially Roosevelt. So this is like he keeps pushing apart the 2 factions of the party. Yeah, but he did a lot of good things. He like this. No, we're not. Okay, then I'll just say that he withdrew a lot of. He withdrew a lot of land for use the natural resources for things like mining.